they can be with their victim.
It made me feel like they were a permanent part of me. Besides the just mere curiosity of what it would be like, it made them feel that they were a part of me, and it gave me a sexual satisfaction to do that.
By the late 80s, Dahmer had spiraled completely into a free fall of killing. A serial killer was on the loose in Milwaukee, but why wasn't anyone noticing? Serial killer profiler Robert Ressler says it was easy for Dahmer to hide.
He was fairly good looking and very shy. And I think I've often said that in any college group, you could put him right in the middle of a college group, and probably you would look at him as a decent young man.
And that was Dahmer's most powerful weapon in luring his victims into his world. 17 in total. They had several traits in common. They were all men, all young, mostly minorities, and almost all were gay. Starting in 1984, one by one, these men disappeared. But nobody in Milwaukee had any idea that a serial killer was on the loose. Annie Schwartz is a crime reporter for the Waukesha Freeman newspaper in Milwaukee.
It was very much business as usual before Jeffrey Dahmer was caught. Because of the nature of the victims, the kinds of people that he chose, they were people that for the most part weren't missed by their families. They were often people who were tossed aside by their families because they were gay or they had had problems with the police. He chose his victims very carefully. He chose people that wouldn't be missed.
If families were not missing the victims, Jeffrey Dahmer's family was missing clues that something was terribly wrong. There were close calls, like this one with his father, Lionel.
I had a box in my bedroom closet, and it contained the mummified head and genitals of a young man I met in one of the bars down in Milwaukee. And it was a locked metal box. My dad one week came to visit and happened to see it, and he was wondering what was in it. He didn't know. Nobody knew. I told him it was pornography, some magazines. And he wasn't satisfied with that answer. We got into a bit of an argument because I wouldn't open it up. He took the locked box down to the basement and was about to smash it open. But I came back in the house, we reconciled.
The reconciliation with his father would mean the lies would go on and that Jeffrey Dahmer would continue to hunt down victims in the gay bars of Milwaukee and kill them. But in a city with a relatively low crime rate, why were the police not connecting the murders? Dahmer's seeming normality helped him hide his reign of terror.
People like Dahmer can get away with this easier because law enforcement does not recognize him for what he is. They're looking for somebody who's dragging their knuckles on the pavement and baying at the moon with hair in their face. They're not looking for Mr. Nice Guy, the quiet young man living in the neighborhood.
But there may have been something more to why the murders went unnoticed.
Okay, hi, I'm on 25th and State, and this is young man. He is butt naked. He has been beaten up. He is very bruised up. He can't stand. He's study fall out. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He was really hurt. And I ain't got no quarter on him. I just seen him, and he needs some help.
Where is he at?
On 25th and State, the corner of 25th and State.
He's just on the corner at the street?
Yeah, he in the middle of the street. He fell out. We trying to help him. Some people trying to help him.
Okay, and he's unconscious right now?
He getting him up, but he is bruised up. Somebody must have jumped on him and stripped him or whatever.
The call is about this young man, Conorak Synthesin phone. The voice is that of a neighbor, Glenda Cleveland, who spotted the young man trying to escape Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. Dahmer had already tried to perform his crude sex zombie experiment on the 14-year-old, drilling a hole in his head and pouring in acid. Drugged, bleeding, dazed, the young man had somehow managed to get away from Dahmer and yell for help. The police did come. Jeffrey Dahmer told the police that Synthesin phone was his 19-year-old lover with whom he'd been quarreling. The police went into Dahmer's apartment, saw nothing amiss, and returned the boy. The police then radioed back to the station, joking about what they had seen.
Intoxicated Asian naked male returns to his sober boyfriend. My partner's going to get deloused at the station.
A month later, when Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested, he admitted to killing Synthesymphone shortly after police left. The death would cost the two police officers their jobs and would force the entire city to look inward at attitudes and treatment of minorities and gays. There would be candlelight vigils and city-decreed days of healing, but Jeffrey Dahmer would leave a black mark on Milwaukee.
The place where Dahmer's apartment building stood was raised and put a playground in. Raised all kinds of money from the community, and no one in the community wanted to use this playground because they said it was the devil's playground. I think that the city of Milwaukee, at the end of the Jeffrey Dahmer case, was left with the unfortunate realization that it can happen here. It being whatever horrific thing that you see on the news that you think happens in other places and to other people. There was the sad realization for people that live in the city of Milwaukee that it could and did happen here.
But of course, the deepest scars would be reserved for the victims' families and the family of the murderer.
Never, Jeffrey! Jeffrey! I hate you! Jeffrey's out of control! Don't with me, Jeffrey! I'll kill you! Look at me! You took my mother's oldest grandchild from her, and for that I can never forgive you. I hope you can deal with what you've done.
The families of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims had their day in court and an opportunity to address him. Jeffrey Dahmer sat motionless throughout. His father, Lionel, sat behind him. Jeffrey's crimes had been a terrible shock for him, so much so that for the first 24 hours after he learned of them, he didn't believe Jeffrey's confession.
How can you see your son who's been riding a tricycle and running around with his dog Frisky and playing tennis with me, taking a knife and cutting a person open, and then doing sexual things with it? It's pretty hard.
Those who profile serial killers can understand why Lionel would have such trouble reconciling his baby boy with the adult killer who would perpetrate such sickening crimes.
We do know that when puberty comes, the ages of 13, 14, 15, that the hormones seem to interact with the brain chemistry, and we have no idea what that's doing or where it's coming from.
I think probably there was a mixture of feelings of anger and hate and disappointment and also feeling extremely sorry for what he did. Felt very sorry for victims and their families and also for Jeff, the terrible waste.
Both Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Flint, Jeffrey's mother, struggled to find a way to support their son in the face of his crimes, a brutal task for any parent to endure.
There's something or things so deeply locked up in his mind that even he doesn't know what's going on. And therefore, I have to hug him.
It's almost like I don't have a right to mourn or grieve, because there are all these families who will never, ever speak to their children again.
By all accounts, Jeffrey Dahmer seemed to be relieved that he had been caught. He cooperated thoroughly with authorities and a battery of doctors and profilers who wanted to learn more about his behavior.
What was uncontrollable about Jeffrey Dahmer was the urge. It was the urge he couldn't control. It was the craving he had to satisfy. And that's why when he killed because he couldn't satisfy the urge any other way and had to do it immediately.
And this is something Dahmer seemed to know better than anyone. At his sentencing, he read a statement of apology for his crimes.
Your Honor, it is over now. This has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. Now I believe I was sick. I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. I know I will be in prison for the rest of my life.
The rest of Jeffrey Dahmer's life would last less than 2 years. In November of 1994, a fellow inmate of Dahmer's beat him to death. The killing occurred in a 20-minute period when the men were unguarded. Although Dahmer expressed repeated remorse for his actions, in the last interview he granted before his death, he made a stunning admission that he still had fantasies of killing.
It never completely goes away. I'll probably have to live with it for the rest of my life. I wish it would go away. I wish there was some way to completely get rid of the compulsive thoughts, the feelings. It's not nearly so bad now that there's no avenues to actually act on it. But no, it never seems to go completely away.